So without any further introduction, I'm going to hand you over to Ciarán, who will be presenting tonight's show.
Thank you very much, Neil, for that kind of introduction. Okay, so Joe St. Ledger. I see many people will be very familiar with Joe's name. He was born in 1930 in the old station house. Grew up in the old station house in Dunkettle on the Cork to Cove line. He started taking pictures way back in the early 1950s, but in the late 1960s, he purchased a cine camera, and this is what the content of this that you'll see tonight. Joe's films mainly consist of some 8mm and Super 8 materials. Super 8 mainly from 1980s onwards. And they kind of come in three different sizes, the 3-inch and 5-inch film reels that you'll see up on the screen on the left-hand side. That's Joe, by the way, on the right-hand side, and you can see him with all his camera regalia, including the cine camera that's on the tripod, which is actually the film camera that he used to record many of the scenes that you'll see tonight. As part of the process of organizing these films involved me having to watch each film on an 8mm projector, which you see there in the lower part of the screen. And throughout watching those films, I would have recorded each scene that Joe made. So that's the 8mm projector that's in use that I have. Dates from the late 1960s, nearly the same vintage as some of the films. And as I went through each film, I recorded the location, the type of train, the engine class, the date where possible, and the geographical locations. And that informed me of the sort of content that each film had, and when selecting some that, will be of interest in showing in these film shows. They are made up of lots of individual films. So I put them through an 8mm cine projector digitizer that you can see here. And this digitizer is actually scanning frame by frame the actual cine film. You can see it's rotating. That's on one of the smaller 3-inch reels. You can see that's more or less the size of the actual images, which is hard to believe that when they're projected on the screen, they actually look so well. So once the films have been digitized, I run them through an image restoration. So I remove some of the jumpiness, some of the grain. So that's the original film on the left, and then the smooth process film on the right. I also carry out some enhancements. So that's the exposure, color correction. That's Joe himself walking the track in the Clonmel area. And you can see the difference between the original recording and something that's actually being processed. And then when the films are restored, I put them into an editor. And as you can see from the lower bar here, you can see that the films are actually sometimes up to 50 films maybe in one timeline. And I chop them up as if you're actually splicing the film back in the old days, and they're all edited together. And they just so it makes something that's kind of in sequence and that's presentable. And then the final thing is I carry out a further restoration work, as you can see here. And then the films are then labeled and packed away. So that's just a brief introduction to the work that I do behind the scenes. Of course, the films were donated to the Society kindly by Joe St. Ledger's family. So what we have here tonight is thanks to their donation. So the films, the first film I'm going to show is going to be based around the Cork area, and we're going to specifically focus on freight scenes. So we're going to visit places like Albert Quay and the Cork City Railway, as well as the North Quays, which is specifically Horgan's Quay, followed by a visit to Tivoli, the installation of the siding at Tivoli, as well to do with oil traffic and the Burmah oil traffic as well. And then we're going to finish this film off with some scenes from the then new freight facility at North Esk. And part two will be showing some scenes from the 1980s, and I'll speak more about those in the second part of the show. And then we'll finish the night with some scenes of the Waterford area as well as the Balnacourty branch. With this opening shot here, it's going to be on the Cork City Railway, and we're going to open up with C212 working a goods train over the Cork City Railway to Albert Quay. And this is a view of the C212 after depositing the wagons in Albert Quay, making its way back to Glanmire Road with a single brake van in tow. C212 was an engine that was long associated with the West Cork area. Recorded on a different day now, this is B142, the now preserved GM diesel, preserved by the RPSI, and it's heading a goods train to Albert Quay along the City Railway on Alfred Street. The train is made up of sundries vans as well as one of the back-to-back fertiliser wagons that was used for pallets of bagged fertilisers, mainly for the fertiliser company Gouldings, which Joe worked for. This is the former Albert Quay terminus in Cork, with another goods working from Glanmire Road arriving in behind the GM diesel. Because Albert Quay had closed the passenger traffic along with the Cork and Bandon system in March 1961. So B142 shunts the back-to-back fertiliser wagons. These wagons entered traffic in 1970 but were superseded by the more familiar bogie fertiliser vans, which you can see on the right-hand side, in 1974. The grey building you see on the right-hand side, that was the tar depot for Cork County Council, and they sometimes received tar traffic by rail. So that's B174 making its way, I think, across the Brian Boru Bridge on the Cork City Railway, about to take the curve into the Quay cutting with the back-to-back fertiliser wagons. They weren't a success, those wagons, and you can see the doors on the side are rather crude fittings. I think they tended to break off or were quite flimsy, so they only had a very, very short life. And in the background you can see some of the city services run by CIE in the Cork area. And here we have B164 taking the curve, I think, onto Alfred Street, or just around the corner from Glanmire Road. You can see it's more of the back-to-back fertiliser wagons. And you'll see the bitumen or tar tanks that I mentioned. So they were for Cork County Council. Now here's B168, I think, crossing over the Clontarf Bridge on the Cork City Railway. And you can see the wagon immediately behind the engine. That is an experimental bag cement wagon. It's a prototype which eventually more or less led to the design of the blue cement wagons that were familiar on Irish railways for many years. That's Joe himself making a cameo in Albert Quay, and he's showing one of the experimental bogie fertiliser vans. There's two examples of the wagons I just mentioned that were used for pallet traffic. As I say, CIE was investing a lot of money into new wagons and new freight flows in the mid-1970s. So you can see the similarity in the design to what led to the blue cement wagons. And you can see the EX that's marked on these wagons, that stands for experimental. And you can see with this bogie fertiliser van, this prototype version actually had like mesh doors on the side. And that's the official photographer from CIE who was visiting Albert Quay to record the new wagon in use. And there's another view of the prototype bag cement wagon. You can see there beside it is a similar design but more simple, just with side doors on it. So here we have forklift truck just doing a few demo loads for the CIE photographer. Again, I think it's for PR purposes. And in the background you can see the tar wagon beside the Cork County Council depot. And that's the back-to-back fertilizer wagon. And you can see the doors are a little bit crude on the side of those. These views were captured from the Hibernian Road Bridge, which used to span the main yard in Albert Quay, as well as the running lines. So the train makes its way along Alfred Street back to Glanmire Road. And you can see the method of loading the bogie fertilizer van. The top two decks in the middle were left empty. I think this was for weight purposes, so not to stress the wagon. And all goods trains on the Cork City Railway always had a brake van in tow. This was to prevent rebound on the train as it was stopping and starting along the street section. You can see clearances along Alfred Street was quite tight, as you can see. Often there's problems with parked vehicles and lorries and all sorts. Now here we have O55 approaching the tunnel at the north end of Cork, O54, and it's with a whole rake of brand new bogie fertilizer vans. So this is the complete or finished product from Inchicore Works. You can see the sparkling paint on the vans. I think he has 10 vans on this occasion. And then B144 making its way down the Cork City Railway. It's between the Brian Boru Bridge and the Clontarf Bridge. And a lot of members in Cork are very helpful for filling me in on a lot of information to do with these trains. So I think Tom Ryan tells me that full-length trains of vans on the Cork City Railway, that was uncommon. So that later they were restricted to much shorter rakes along the street section. So maybe these were just in the early days. I believe this may be recorded around spring 1976, at a time when these vans replaced the back-to-back wagons. This locomotive, I think B142, I think. You see the van doors aren't mesh, they're just ordinary plain looking ones. And there's a view of again how the pallets were stacked into the vans. And so the train is making its way down Alfred Street, and with I think a Jaguar Mark I saloon car making an appearance. A bit of a hold up, I think, but probably because of a lorry or parked car on the road. Yep, you can see how tight the clearance is. Oh, B142 enters Glanmire Road Yard. You'll see with one of these vans, the side doors you'll see shortly actually has louvered sides on it. And that's another preserved GM diesel, B146. That's preserved by the Irish Traction Group and it remains operational at the Downpatrick and County Down Railway. So again, another view Joe captured on Alfred Street. There's a van I mentioned that has the slightly different design and doors on the side compared to the others. You can see the train shed of Kent Station in the background. So B146 climbs a steep gradient out of Cork. And at the rear of the train, you can see that prototype bag cement van or wagon. That's the Clyde cutting on the Cork City Railway, and now we have B177 coming out onto the approach to the Brian Boru Bridge with a 30-ton brake van in tow. This is on a different day, this time with B161. And the bus, I believe in the background, I think thanks to Joe Lawton, confirmed to me this yellow bus, an R-class bus, was used as a training vehicle for CIE staff. And then making its way along Alfred Street, and as you can see, train is much shorter in size compared to the other ones that Joe recorded. Just 4 vans on this occasion. I think that looks like a Renault 4 in the background there. And now gleaming in Super Train livery, I think it's locomotive 178, heads for Albert Quay Yard with 3 fertiliser vans. Of course, holding up probably a fair amount of traffic behind it. Not too much a problem with the cyclist though. Now we move to the North Quays, or more specifically Horgan's Quay, adjacent to Kent Station. Now we see oil wagons being loaded from an adjacent ship. Now these oil trains, I believe, were a temporary arrangement for the Balnacourty traffic. So this was recorded around late 1970, November 1970 possibly. Here we have C230, one of the C-Class engines still running with its original Crossley, Metropolitan Vickers Crossley engines. And we just jump away from the Cork area, just briefly, to see one of these oil trains at Clonee on the Balnacourty branch. So the arrangement for loading oil on Horgan's Quay, the facilities for loading oil at Tivoli had yet to be constructed. So this was a temporary arrangement in the early days of the Balnacourty traffic. So here we see the laden oil train approaching Quigley Magnesite near Dungarvan at Balnacourty, led by B158. And you'll see it as normal practice. Normally when the train arrived, it ran round and propelled the oil wagons back into the factory site. There's the train. B156 was the other engine. And that's Quigley Magnesite plant in Balnacourty. But back to Kent Station and Horgan's Quay. Here we have Maybach diesel shunter E429. And Joe captures this on a misty day, shunting the oil wagons. I believe this was around February 1971, as E429 is recorded as being Kent Station pilot in Irish Railfans News on that particular date. And that's the gate that led from the railway yard in Kent Station out onto the quay side. So we've seen a C-Class locomotive and a Maybach, and on that occasion Joe recorded a GM diesel. So you'll see a few more scenes of that as well. So this is one of the oil trains heading out of Cork, led by that engine that we've seen already, B142. And here's another oil train, this time heading in the opposite direction, descending the gradient down from Rathpeacon at Kilbarry. A shot that Joe captured of the station staff and shunter with E429 on the North Quays. You can see the shunter with the long pole used for hooking and unhooking the wagons. Of course, this road nowadays is one of the main arteries into Cork city centre, so I couldn't imagine something like an operation like this happening nowadays. It seemed to be a lot quieter road back in those days. Just a man with a red flag was enough to protect the train, as well as a little notice saying beware of trains. I think you'll see that in some of the shots. And Joe captures one of those oil trains passing the sidings at Rathpeacon. This was around 1971 when these oil trains started running Saturday and Sundays, departing Cork around 12:15. And then we have a GM diesel, this time performing the shunt on the quay, B169. The stone abutment that you just see visible in the background, it's kind of a painted white. That formerly was the coal gantry, where there is a bridge spanning this road, where there's a coal gantry where the small locomotive Pat used to work coal hoppers to and from the ships into the railway yard in Kent Station. But by this stage, only the stone abutment of the gantry remained. So I've just included, I know some of these scenes, they're a little bit repetitive, but I've just included them just to demonstrate the different motive power that was used in these operations. And there's Joe himself, and you can see the little red sign that was on the roadway warning motorists and pedestrians of trains shunting on the quayside. I think that's a barrier wagon, just a four-wheel flat wagon that's been used in this shunt. And again, you can see to the left that stone bridge abutment that was used for the coal gantry. This is E429. And you'll see that some wagons are shunted or in a freewheel fashion onto the quayside. It looks like a Morris Minor. And Joe is on scene to capture the whole action. Certainly the sign, danger, beware of wagons, particularly if the wagons were just being loose shunted across the road. And then another one of those oil trains, led by B169, captured by Joe at Ratpecan. So we're going to just move a little further east to North Esk, and here we have B174 with a works train used for delivering materials for the new railway yard in North Esk. You can see a passenger train from Cove heading wrong road back to Cork City. In the foreground you can see the turnouts being assembled for the point work at the Cork end of North Esk Yard. This was around 1974, summer 1974, when work had commenced in earnest. So North Esk replaced the goods yard at Albert Quay that we saw earlier. Albert Quay closed at the end of 1976, and in particularly with the fertilizer traffic, that was eventually transferred to North Esk around September 1976. This is taken a little bit later now, so we have the 4 sidings have been laid. I think the 30-ton gantry has been installed, and we have a ballast train arriving from the Cork direction, hauled by one of the Sulzer locomotives. I think it's 103. Yep, 103. And in the background you can see the 30-ton gantry. The Sulzer locomotives at this stage had been mainly confined to permanent way work, such as ballast trains like this. And on this occasion, it's 107. I think this was taken around May 1975, not long after North Esk had actually opened. As you can see, there's some containers already on site. So 107, after depositing its ballast, heads back to Cork. The yard was capable of storing 500 containers, usually up to 20 and 40 foot variety. Just some finishing touches being made to the depot sign, and that's a more traditional goods working from the yawl branch heading to Cork, made up of loose coupled stock. And then we have the more modern train, a liner train, made up of 20-foot containers for the Bell Ferry Company. So Bell Ferry, I think, were the first customer to be handled at the North Esk terminal. I think B&I liners were still handled in Glanmire Road Yard until July 1975. You can see this train of Bell containers. It's made up of some of the white refrigerated containers. It's B169, seen running round the train. And that's the gantry at work. There's an overview of the new terminal. Again, these scenes are around May 1975. And you can see in these early days of the liner trains, nearly all of them were made up of the smaller containers, 20-foot containers. The 40-foot ones had not made an appearance. Now we have an A class this time, shunting some containers. And running round, thanks locomotive 031. And according to the reports in the IRRS journal, you could have up to 9 trains working in and out daily from North Esk. For instance, one of the Bell Ferry trains would arrive at 3 o'clock and then depart at 8:30 that evening. You can see in this shot of a liner train arriving from Cork, some of the sidings and point work had yet to be assembled. I think the locomotive's 184, and it has one of the 40-foot containers on this particular train. So 184, seen running round this train using the up road from Cove. And then I think it's departing. And the traffic you can see in the background, that's on the main road leading from Glunton direction into Cork. And there we see, I think it was the same train that we saw earlier, the one with the 40-foot container on it. So I say they weren't too common back in the mid-1970s compared to the smaller type containers. And you can see some of the containers are the type that CIE introduced to traffic with the curtain sides. They weren't too successful. I don't think they lasted too much in traffic. I think you can see there the first container is a curtain-sided variety, as well as the third one. And in later years, the yard received a 45-ton gantry. That was in October 1994. But despite that investment, liner trains ceased using North Esk in July 2005, and I think the last Guinness liner departed North Esk in August 2006. Bringing a close to operations at the depot. And then finally in October 2008, as part of the resignaling scheme on the Cove Cork line, the crossover and turnout into the yard were removed completely. So direct lorry to train load demonstration there with a 40-foot container. Now I mentioned about the transfer of fertilizer traffic from the old Albert Quay yard to North Esk, and I think this was one of the first occasions of a fertilizer train coming into North Esk yard. It was hauled by an A class. I think this was around autumn, or more specifically September 1976, because there was a siding at the cove end of North Esk that was specifically used for fertilizer traffic. The locomotive is 057. So that's the siding that I mentioned. I had a large, I think, loading area that was used for the bagged fertilizer traffic, as you can see. Get a demonstration again of the method of loading the pallets with that particular way of leaving the middle stack just with empty at the top level. Again, I think that was for weight purposes. And there's your more traditional goods train on the main line heading for Youghal. That's a bitumen tank. I believe that was for Cork County Council. We saw some of the bitumen tanks heading to Albert Quay. So again, I think they simply transferred to North Esk. And Ray Good informed me that they were used for transferring to the Cork County Council depot at Skibbereen in West Cork. Now, for the final segment of this particular film of Joe's, we move to Tivoli. That's P186 with a single oil tank, followed by A42R with a laden sugar beet train from Youghal heading for Turles sugar beet factory. You can see one of the wagons on the train is of wooden framed. Now Joe had come to Tivoli to record the installation of the siding into the Burmah oil depot. So there's Joe observing the work in a little bit like a Alfred Hitchcock style. And there's a Youghal goods on the main line. You can see how tight that siding is. It was an extension or turnout off the siding serving the oil facility at Tivoli that was used for the Balmacorty traffic. It's A19R with a B train. Again, a couple of wooden framed wagons were in that formation. And now we have locomotive B150 arriving with the Burmah liveried oil wagons. This was the 5th of March 1973, and I believe it was a trial run for the Burmah traffic. And no locomotives worked into the depot itself. A tractor was used to haul the tank wagons in and out of the depot, as you can see. So there are 6 of these oil tank wagons in the Burmah livery, 3 in the red and white colours, and the 3 other ones were in the navy colour. So again, this is a trial run for the traffic, just to check that everything worked out fine. And the tractor operation, that was normally worked by a Burmah employee. And you'll see that they had their own tractor for this, but without a cab. It had a modified buffer beam and draw hook for the tanks. So that's one of the navy liveried tank wagons. This was all around March 1973. Construction of the siding began the previous month, in February. And so B150 heads light engine back to Cork. And operations were meant to begin on the 7th of March, but there's a labour dispute that day, so it wasn't until the following day, 8th of March 1973, that the traffic commenced officially. Now, A10R, that's arriving from the Cork direction with a sundries van and a brake van, which, as you will see, were used as barrier wagons on this first day of operation at the Burmah depot. You can see the tractor that I mentioned. It doesn't really have much of a cab. You can see the modified buffer beam that's attached to it, and you can see it's struggling to push some of the wagons out onto the siding. So this was the 8th of March 1973. So A10R, which delivered A11R, which delivered the barrier wagons in the form of the sundries van and brake van, you'll see that in the formation when the train departs. This is a good view of the tractor. I think it was around early 1990 is when this traffic ceased, but it ran between Cork and Limerick, where there is a similar depot for the Burmah traffic. So B203 departs with the first train to Limerick of the Burmah oil tanks. You can see the sundries van and brake van included in the formation. So the sidings were disconnected in April 2000. And that brought an end to traffic at Tivoli. So that concludes the first film for tonight's film show. So I hope you enjoyed that, and we will rejoin you in the second half.